Welcome everyone. My name is Abby Lambert. I am a food preservation intern with SDSU Extension, and we're so excited that you all have joined us again today for another session of our Food Preservation at Home series. This is the third session of the series, which will run all the way through September 22nd. Sessions will occur every 2 weeks, and each session we're talking about a new food preservation topic. So we'll be covering a wide variety of different food preservation methods, which we'll have up in the screen in just a second here. And they cover everything from last week we talked about pressure canning. The week before we also talked about the different things you need to be concerned about when you're looking at the farmer's market or going to the farmer's market. And so next week, I believe we also have fermenting. And then the week after that, we will have jams and jellies right there, right up there. And then in August, we'll be covering pickling, freezing, and after that, dehydrating and canning meats, of course, to wrap up our series. But today we have Megan Erickson, who is going to talk to us about water bath canning. So some questions have been submitted to us with registrations, and they will be addressed throughout the live session. Otherwise, if you have any questions while we're going through the session, feel free to type those right in the chat box there, and we'll get those answered for you. So let's get started. But before I introduce Megan, I would like you guys to type in your location, whether you have used a water bath canner, and if so, what your favorite thing to can is in the chat box. So we can just get to know you guys a little bit more and what you like to preserve. Also, while you guys are getting that typed in the chat box, we have a few polling questions to start our day. So I'll launch those for you. So the first one is, we just want you to rank your confidence level with these different questions. So the first one is your knowledge on current practices for today's home food preservation topic, which is of course water bath canning. So I'll give you guys a little bit of time to get those submitted, and then we'll see confidence level wise. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds and then I'll end this poll. Okay, we'll see here what everyone's looking a little bit between on the side of being confident and then the opposite side of being not so confident. So hopefully we can have that change throughout this session. So I'll launch our second question here, which is your ability to follow safe practices for today's home food preservation topic. Give you a few more seconds. Looks like pretty much everyone has voted. Okay, and we'll end that here. And it looks like we're a little bit more confident than the last one, but hopefully we can get those up to very confident by the end. And our final polling question is knowing where to go for safe, research-tested recipes for preserving food using water bath canners. Give you a few more seconds to get those answers in. All right, we're looking even more confident on this last one, which gives us hope that we can even make that so you all are at very confident by the end of today. Okay. So with that, I will introduce Megan to you guys. Megan is a nutrition field specialist based in the Aberdeen Regional Center. Megan shares her knowledge as a registered dietitian nutritionist to support individuals and families live a lifestyle balanced with healthy nutrition and physical activity practices. She started canning at a young age with her grandmother, and over the years has made many memories of freezing corn. And she is here today to talk to us about water canning, water bath canning. So with that, Megan, I'm going to turn the session over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. To figure out my microphone and all that. Make sure I'm getting unmuted. Awesome. So I was peeking in the chat, seeing what you guys like to can. And I would say my favorite thing to water bath can is peaches, because I do a lot of tomatoes. I would say there's nothing better than opening up a can of peaches in the dead of winter and tasting summer. So that is one of my favorites. My mom comes over and we kind of make an assembly line and go from there. So I am super excited to have you guys join me to talk about water bath canning. If my slides would advance. There we go. Okay, so kind of the main thing that we always like to point out is, with any kind of canning or when you're kind of dealing with food safety in general, you want to really beware when you're canning of botulism. When it's one of the most dangerous kinds of food poisoning, it can be life-threatening, and it's really due to improper canning techniques. So whether maybe you decided to water bath, maybe you weren't confident in pressure canning, or maybe you didn't know. So maybe you water bath canned when you should have pressure canned. Maybe ignored signs of spoilage, like, oh, it looks fine, I'll be okay. And not following the recipe, a tested recipe, and not following the instructions. Maybe you kind of skipped a step or sped up the process. So to avoid it, just by using the proper canning techniques, when to water bath can versus pressure canning, adjusting for altitude, I'll touch on that a little bit. And Kleine, she's the other field specialist with food preservation. This is kind of our motto. We always say, when in doubt, throw it out. So whenever you have any questions, just throw it out. It's better to be safe than sorry. But other things, is it leaking? Is the lid bulging? Is there, other signs of food spoilage, odor, discolored food? Why is this not advancing? Sorry about this. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to kind of walk through the steps of water bath canning. And by the time I'm done, those of you that maybe aren't as confident, I have a feeling you are going to be more confident in water bath canning. And maybe those that are more experienced in water bath canning, hopefully maybe pick up something new or just a reminder on the steps. So before canning, we always want to select the highest quality of produce, checking the ripeness, the age. Of course, we want to wash and dry our produce and prepare it according to recipe. Each recipe is different. Some may want it diced. Do we need to peel it? How big of pieces should I chop it in? So make sure that, you're following your recipe or preparing your produce according to your recipe, first and foremost. All right, so we got our produce. Now we got to decide, there's two methods, there's a raw pack and a hot pack. And you can kind of put in the chat box too, and I'm gonna open mine up too to kind of take a look. If you prefer a raw pack or a hot pack, or maybe you didn't know there was a difference. So raw pack is the food is raw, not heated, and it's put directly into your jar. The food is packed tightly, and then you're just covering the raw food with a hot liquid. During this process, the food will likely shrink, and then you can see here in the picture we've done carrots, and typically the carrots will float because there's shrinkage, and that's completely normal. All right, so that is raw pack, and then we have hot pack. So hot pack, you are heating the food to boiling, And then you place the hot food into the jars a little bit more loosely. Again, cover it with the hot liquid. With this method, there is less shrinkage, so you are going to get more food into your jars, thus resulting fewer jars. The hot pack also kind of helps kick or kill some of those microorganisms right away just because you're boiling them. And also better color and flavor. And I can attest to, Hope and I can both attest to the hot pack having better color and flavor, especially in our peaches. Hope did an experiment where she did raw and hot pack. And you know, probably the first couple months you couldn't tell the difference with the color. But then as the months went on, the color definitely retained better in the hot pack, and the flavor was a lot more flavorful with the hot pack. So it is an extra step, but I would say that I definitely hot pack. It's a personal preference, but it's just something to consider. So those are the difference between hot pack and raw pack. All right, so how do we pack our jars? So even before I fill the produce or start prepping, I fill my canner halfway full of water and then place on the burner on medium heat just to start warming it up. And then you'll fill your wash jars with your produce, fill with any kind of hot liquid, depending on what you're canning. And then you want to measure with headspace, leaving the appropriate amount. Every food has its own headspace. And in these kind of kits, and I'll show here, there's the funnel there, and then there's the headspace tool. Those kind of come in a kit, fairly reasonable. You can get those at your local hardware store, or Walmart even has kind of a good, cool tool kit to have. But here's headspace. Headspace is important. It's the space in the jar between the bottom of the lid and the top of the liquid. Sometimes I get too happy and I pour way too much in here. I'm trying to take liquid or food out or something. But for water bath canning, you know, some of our foods, like our jellied fruit products, those are typically about 1/4 of an inch. And then like peaches, tomatoes, pickles, those are going to be 1/2 an inch headspace. So it really creates that vacuum seal. It allows air to release, and you'll be able to create that vacuum seal and make sure that you're ensuring a safe product. So that is headspace, and it's you can measure that with that headspace tool. All right, so you've measured your headspace. This handy dandy headspace tool, you flip it around and it's kind of a rubber spatula. You just wipe that around your jar. It's just to help remove any air bubbles that you may have. Take a damp cloth, wipe around the jar, especially if you're doing jams and jellies or peaches with the syrup. It tends to get really sticky. So make sure that you're wiping that top of the jar, and that will ensure a proper seal when you put your lid on. So you put your lid on, put your band on, fingertip tight, and then you'll lower them into the canner. And you can see that they have a jar lifter. That's another thing that you can get in the kit, the canning kit, and you'll place your jars upright into the canner. All right, time. So with water bath canning, the food is heated obviously by the boiling water, and it's surrounded by the boiling water. And we want our food in water bath canning to reach 212 degrees. So the time, each recipe has its own specific processing time. So you want to make sure that you're processing it correctly, because you can be at risk for food poisoning. So another thing that a lot of people maybe don't realize is you have to adjust for altitude. Anything above 1,000 feet, you need to add processing time, and I'll pull up a chart to kind of help determine where you are. I'm located kind of by Aberdeen, and and we're above 1,000 feet, so I have to add 5 minutes to my processing time. Now that may be different if you're, well, we have Brianna from Montana, or, you know, we have, if you're out West River in the hills, you know, you may have to add time. Another thing is with time, don't account for the size of your jar. Some of our bigger jars, you know, require more processing time. Another thing is you process for fewer minutes than specified. So if you're, you know, running late for something and you're like, oh, it's only 5 minutes, you know, note that 5 minutes is important in the sterilization process. And that kind of brings me to the last bullet is, you know, every canned food has its own process time. Say it's 10 minutes, you process 10 minutes. Once your timer's off, you'll remove your lid. And you want to let your jar sit for 5 minutes. That's part of the sterilization process and super important step that we don't want to miss. So that's kind of just a touch on time. All right, here's heat penetration. There's kind of two different methods, conduction and convection. And you can kind of see the blue spot in the jar. We kind of refer that to as our cold spot. The cold spot is typically a little bit harder to reach in your more thicker, you know, maybe our salsas where there's more food particles, different, you know, peppers and tomatoes and onions, different foods. All of those food particles have to reach a certain temperature. So with water bath canning, it has to reach 212 degrees. Pressure canning that Hope talked about a couple weeks ago has to reach 240 degrees. And a lot of, you know, there's different things that can help or that slow down the heat penetration. So whether you have extra sugar or fat in your recipe, maybe, you know, if you have carrots and they're maybe oversized pieces, those things can kind of slow down the heat penetration. Okay, so today we are talking about water bath canning. Last week we talked about pressure canning. So let's dive in a little bit. So here is what a water bath canner can look like. When I grew up canning with my grandma, and I know she still has this, she has the blue enamel one that has the ripple bottom. So they're typically made of aluminum or porcelain covered steel. Some people, you can use a stock pot. You just want to make sure that your pot is deep enough so that at least 1 inch of boiling water is covering your jars at all time during processing. And the canner also, this is important, the canner should be no more than 4 inches wider in diameter than your heating element on your stove. So on each side, you'll have 2 inches. So no more than 4 inches in total. That just to ensure that the heat is evenly distributed throughout your canner. Abby just posted a canning on smooth stovetop publication that we have on our website. This will be important if you do have a smooth stovetop. You want to make sure, just like you want to have a canner with a smooth bottom, just like in this picture. That way the heat is going to be distributed evenly. If you have an oven that have more of the coils, your kind of ripple bottom will work for those. And notice here you have a fitted lid. You want to make sure, because that will trap the air or the heat in. And then this one has a rack that you lower down. If you're using just a stock pot at home, just make sure that you're buying some kind of like a rack to put on the bottom. You don't want your jars touching the bottom of your canner. You want to prevent them from cracking, and you want the boiling water to go underneath so that the jars are evenly being heated. So that is kind of on equipment. Okay, so this is one of the main things that helps determine if we should water bath can or pressure can. And it's super important to kind of know the acidity level of foods. So with water bath canning, we are doing high acid or acidified foods. So there's molds and yeast present in these foods, and they can be easily destroyed when exposed to temperatures between 140 and 190. And then with the boiling water canners, we want to heat that food to 212 degrees. That way we're killing off all molds, yeast, any bacteria that may survive those temperatures. So as you can see on this chart, I know it's a little small, maybe hard to read, but you can see your pickles, tomatoes are kind of in the middle, and I can touch on tomatoes, but any of your fruits, pickling, those are going to be our high acid foods. If you're kind of doing more of the beans and the carrots, those are going to be, you'll want a pressure can. Now, tomatoes are kind of borderline. I water bath can my tomatoes. Now, there are definitely recipes out there where you can pressure can, but tomatoes, just to make sure that you just want to make sure that you're adding an acid like lemon juice to them to make sure that they have a high enough acid to be safely water bath canned. So that's just a little tip on tomatoes. Some recipes say you can use vinegar or lemon juice. I always suggest lemon juice just because the vinegar kind of gives kind of an off taste. Still works fine, but I would recommend and prefer lemon juice just for a better taste. Okay, now I've kind of touched on some of the steps, but this kind of just breaks them down a little bit more. We have a publication on water bath canning. But like I said, before you even start prepping your food, fill your canner halfway full, turn the burner on just to kind of start heating up that water. It will save you from waiting when you have all your jars ready, and then you have to wait for your water to heat. That way your water is warm and you can kind of slowly bring it up to a boil. And then you'll prepare your food, fill your jars as directed, ensuring head space, remove any air bubbles. You'll wipe the rims, screw on your jar, your band on your jar. Now, I always have to tell my husband when he's helping me, he's stronger than me. But I was like, you don't need to crank on that band. You don't, just fingertip tight. You want to make sure that it's not so tight because you want the air from the jar to be able to release to create that seal. If it's on too tight, the air can't escape and that lid can tend to buckle, and then you're not going to get a good seal. So just screw it on to fingertip tight. And then you'll place the jars in the wire rack in the canner. Make sure that there's a little space in between your jars. You want that water to flow evenly throughout. Ensure that the water level is 1 to 2 inches above the jars. Depending on your processing time, like tomatoes are a lot longer. I always aim for a little bit more water above my jars just to be on the safe side. But I also have my grandma would have a kettle, but just like a small pot of water, boiling water on the side. That way, if you ever come close, you can just add some water to it if you are a little bit low on your water. You want to make sure that it's boiling at all times. If the water is below the jars or if it stops boiling at any time, unfortunately, you have to restart your processing time all over again. I know, not what you want to hear, but to ensure that food safety wise, you'll have to reprocess. All right, so once your jars are in, you'll place your lid on the canner, turn it to the highest heat, and bring the water to a boil. You don't start timing until that water has started boiling. And set your timer, adjust for altitude if necessary. So depending for water bath canning, if you have to add 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however long. And then when the processing time is complete, turn off your heat, remove your canner lid, and then let it sit there on the stove for 5 minutes. This is, like I said before, this is part of the sterilization process. All right, so you'll remove your jars from the canner using the jar lifter you can see in that picture. Remember to bring them straight up. You don't want to tip them, slosh them all over, just to make sure that seal is being safe. Also, when you lift them up out of the water, there tends to be water on top of the lid. That is okay. when I first started canning, you know, I was like, oh, there's water, I need to wipe it off. No, you don't want to risk messing with the seal or of the lid. It will eventually evaporate. So if there's water on top of the lid, that is perfectly okay. Set them on a towel on your counter uninterrupted. Leave them there for 12 to 24 hours. After that's up, you know, check the lids for seals. For our kind of experienced canners, you'll agree that the music to our ears is that ping noise. And it just brings a smile to my face. I was like, yes, it's sealed. But the lid should not flex up and down when the center is pressed. Another test that you can do, I actually did this last year with my tomatoes, is you take a spoon and you just kind of clink it on the lid. And if it's a high pitched, kind of a higher pitched noise, that means it's sealed. But if it's like a dull sound, that means it's not sealed. And I actually found this on a couple jars of my tomatoes, and I just stick those in the fridge and ate them right away versus reprocessing. But you can remove bands, test the seals. You can gently pull up to see if they're sealed, and then store in a nice, cool, dark, dry place for 18 months. Like I said, you can reprocess your canned goods, any that did not seal, if you discover them within the 24 hours. Okay, adjusting for altitude. So this is the step that sometimes we forget about, and it's actually really important. So as water boils at lower temperatures, at higher altitudes, we want to add the processing time to kind of destroy those heat-resistant bacteria. So like I said, I'm on the east side of the state, close to Aberdeen, and I have to add 5 minutes to when I water bath can. So just make sure that you are checking your altitude, and I have a chart here on our next page. And Abby again posted our publication that has adjusting for altitudes. So depending on where you fall for your altitude, you just add extra time for your processing. Okay, recipes. So we want to make sure that people are following safe, evidence-based, tested recipes. We want to make sure that the pH level is accurate and in a safe level. It's not recommended to can homemade recipes. My grandma's not going to like me saying that because she has, I will admit she has some of the best recipes. But it's encouraged if you want to make your own homemade spaghetti sauce or homemade, whatever recipe, stick them in the freezer or eat them right away. That's kind of recommended versus canning, just because you don't know what that pH level is, and I want you to be safe. Other unsafe recipes is Pinterest. Pinterest has a lot of cool recipes out there, blogs, recipe magazines. Just take caution of where they are getting their recipe from. If it's from a reliable source, then that's great. But if not, I would stay clear of it. Also, recipes older than 1994 may be unsafe. Just because there's just been a lot of research that's been done, a lot of testing, updates that have been done, and we know more. So the recipes that were developed, before then may not be safe. But we have a safe canning recipes. So any kind of extension website, the USDA has a complete guide to home canning. The home food preservation page has canning. And then we have our, on the extension page, a part of our Pick It, Try It, Like It series or publications, we have a Preserve It. So based on what produce, you can click on and it will come up. This is what the grapes is. It will come up and it will show you the steps to either water bath can or pressure can. There's a freezing section and then a drying section. So a lot of different ways that we can preserve our food. So this is on recipes. and advance. Perfect. Oh, and I kind of touched on this already, but again, checking the seals of your jars, after they've cooled, remove the screw bands and just test to see if they truly sealed, whether by that ping noise that I talked about, pressing in the middle of the lid with your finger, tapping the lid with a spoon. I had never done that before, so when I heard the dull sounds, I'm like, no, it means it didn't seal, but that's okay. I probably, depending on where it is, or it just happens sometimes. So, which was fine because I just threw it into a hot dish that night and it was all good. Or in just holding the jar level, eye level, does it curve down, that lid curve down, making sure that it's sealed. But again, when in doubt, throw it out. If you ever see those signs of spoilage, bad seal, improper color, if there's a lot of air bubbles, foam leaking, mold growth, slimy texture, all those sound bad enough that food spoilage. So just making sure that you're checking your jars before eating them. That will make sure that you are being safe. Okay, reprocessing. So canned food can be safely reprocessed if discovered with that 24 hours. I kind of jumped ahead of myself. But to recan, remove the lid and check the jar sealing for, surfaces for any nicks around that surface to make sure it's nice and smooth. You have to change your lid. You can't reuse a lid. Now, I guess there are reusable lids out there. You just have to make sure that you are following the directions correctly. And they're still kind of doing research on those lids to ensure the accuracy of them. But if you're using, just your typical ball canning lids or other brands, you'll need a new lid. But then just start your water bath canner up and go through the whole process all over again. But if you don't want to do that, another option is you can refrigerate it, freeze, or eat right away, which it's hard to even keep salsa in my cupboard. It's eaten before the winter's already here. So I kind of have to hide it if I want to keep it for longer. All right, so that's reprocessing. Oh, I love this video. So just because it seals doesn't mean it's safe. So this was a jar of, I believe, salsa sent to Kansas State University. They wanted to test it to test the pH and get it, or the recipe tested so they could sell it at the farmer's market. And if you joined a couple weeks ago with Hope, she showed the same video, and we show this with a lot of our workshops, but it never gets old. But let's see if my video can work here. She opened it, and I felt like it just came alive and it started flowing out of the jar. So this is an example of an unsafe product that was at the pH level, and it wasn't canned properly, and this was not a safe product. And it was sealed. It looked fine, but when they opened it, it came alive, and it was not safe. So they had to send it back and help modify the recipe to ensure that it was safe. So just kind of a fun video I like showing. Okay, storing our foods, with the new lids and seals, our canned products are best used within 18 months. So they're good if you are following a tested recipe and storing properly, your jars are good for up to 18 months. Don't store them near hot pipes, near a stove, a furnace, under a sink, in the direct sunlight. Or like today where it's super hot and humid, I wouldn't want to store them out in my garage. Those would not be good conditions. So try to find a cool, dark, dry place. And also label and date, because I don't know about you, but I don't have a good memory. So I forget. So just label and date when you can them so you know when that 18 months is up. All right. If it will let me advance, there we go. Here are some food preservation resources that you can go to. Our SDSU extension website. Kansas State has a great sort of resources. The National Center for Home Food Preservation, that's where we get all of our recipes and refer a lot of people to. And then the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning. But a lot of, there's our state extension website, universities, they have really great tested resources out there. So just make sure that you're finding a reliable resource. Okay, so I'm going to give you some canning tips and tricks that just to consider. So these are kind of what not to do. So we don't want to can salsa or spaghetti sauce in anything bigger than a pint. We learned this in our training just because with all of the different particles and pieces in salsa and spaghetti, remember I talked about that cold spot? It's harder to reach that cold spot to ensure that is reaching that 212 degrees. So it's not recommended to can anything for salsa and spaghetti sauce in anything bigger than a pint. You don't have to boil, you don't want to boil your lids in water prior to use. This will sometimes soften the rubber on the lid too much and it won't create a good seal. You don't want to use old mayonnaise jars for pressure canning, only use those for water bath canning. We don't want to can in 1 gallon jars. And you don't want to reuse lids unless they are specifically the reusable lids. But in general, you don't reuse lids. So that's what not to do. Here are some things that you can do. So wash your jars and lids in warm soapy water prior to use. This is something new. If your processing time is more than 10 minutes, you don't have to sterilize your jars and lids. But if it's less than 10 minutes, you still have to sterilize your jars. So that's something a little bit newer that came out within the last couple years. So if your processing time is more than 10 minutes, you don't have to sterilize your jars. So it's one less step that you may have to do. You can warm your lids in some warm water. That will help soften the rubber gasket on the lid, but avoid boiling them. And you can use anywhere from 4 ounce to a ½ gallon jars, but in reminding you that the ½ gallon is for canning juice only, and you can reuse jars and lids. So if you're just starting out, your initial cost for canning may be a little bit more that first year, just because you have to buy your water bath canner and your jars and all of your supplies. But then the next years, you can reuse your jars and your rings, so you're only then having to purchase your lids. So that first year may be a little bit more, but cost effectively later on, it is good. There are a lot of packaged mixes out there. It makes for a quick and easy canning. There's some good ones with salsa and pickles. Just make sure that you are following the recipe that's associated with the mix. So it's typically on the back. So make sure that you're following that recipe, adjusting for altitude. If you are wanting to add some more, I'm trying to think, my husband likes spicy and I do not like spicy salsa. So I typically, make my salsa according to recipe, and then when I open it and serve it, I add like jalapenos or add a little bit more to his. But if you want it spicier, you can you can change out the peppers for ratio depending on what they are. Okay, I kind of threw a lot at you, a lot of hopefully good information, kind of walked you through the steps of water bath canning, looked at how to find safe recipes, kind of do's and don'ts, tips and tricks of canning. Do we have, I guess we'll open this up for questions. You can type them in the chat box, or if you're brave enough, you can unmute and ask Ask away.
Hey Megan, this is Nikki.
Hi.
Sorry if I missed you covering this because I joined late. I'm just curious, for the main thing I've canned is tomatoes. Is there like a good time based on the ripeness of the tomato to can it? I mean, is it better when they're, still kind of hard, or really if I get to my garden late and they're squishy, like can I still can them?
Yeah, I mean, the quality might be, but I mean, when you're processing, they're cooking anyways, and when you're blanching them, but you just want to make sure they're free of any bruising, any spots. But you're going to be blanching them and skinning them, and I mean, I'm smushing mine in. You just want to make sure if there are signs of mold or signs of spoilage, then of course you don't want to use them. But depending on when you planted your tomatoes, that will determine when they're ready. I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jeanette.
Hi, Jeanette.
Hi, my question is, I'm very new at this. When you took the jars out of the canner, you took the screw lid part off. But then when you showed the picture of them being stored, they had the screw lid back on. I'm a little confused with that. And right now, the ones up on the screen don't have the screw lids. So do you store them with those screw lids or not? Or when do you take them on and off?
Absolutely. Yep, that can get confusing. So that's a good thing on my part. I'll make sure that my pictures are accurately displaying what I'm talking about. So so when you take them out of the canner and onto your towel, you'll let them set for 12 to 24 hours with the screw bands and everything. After that is up, you'll wanna, then you can, if they've, you've checked for all the steps, if they've sealed, if they have sealed, then you can remove your screw band and then you can store them in a cool, dry, dark place without the screw band.
Okay, I was just a little confused then. When they were on and when they were off.
Yep, you'll leave them on, you'll put them on when you are putting them in the water bath canner. Leave them on when they're setting, when you take them right after they're done onto your towel. And once they're cool, and after that 12 to 24 hours, if they've sealed, you can take them off. But if you need to reprocess them, obviously then you'll put on a new lid and then you'll put the screw band on.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Megan, we do have another question about whether jars can reseal if the band is left on in storage, or does that mean they went bad?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would say, yeah, you want to make sure that the band is off, because if they as you're saying, reseal, you don't, I'm trying to think on that. Yeah, you want to take the bands off because they necessarily they may seal, but it might not be a good seal. Because I had a can of tomatoes where I actually left the screw band on and I took it off, and I did that test where you just like slowly pull up on the lid. I didn't yank on it, but I was hardly pulling and it came off. It was sort of sealed. It showed all signs of sealing. I did, the finger test and everything, but it technically wasn't sealed. But again, take a look at your produce, smell it. Is it an off color? Is there any leakage? Is there a lot of air bubbles? That means that you didn't have a good seal and there was a lot of air coming into your jar. Those are some signs of spoilage too. But yes, I would recommend taking your bands off. And Jim does all of his water bath canning on the patio. That's awesome that you have the opportunity, and then your kitchen doesn't get all hot. I know a lot of people, I have some relatives that have an extra stove out in their garage that they do their canning.
Any other questions for Megan today?
I have a question on making salsa. I've never canned in my life before. So do you cut everything up and then you put it in the jar and then you put hot water in there? Or how does that work?
Oh, yep, typically with salsa, so you'll follow your recipe, but the ones that I've done, they have you prepare, so like your onions, you know, you'll chop up your tomatoes, your peppers, but then you simmer that and you boil it for, you know, say like 20 minutes. You put that all in your jar. You don't the recipes that I do, that you don't have to add water. So it's just the juices from the tomatoes and the produce that you fill your jar with. Does that make sense? Perfect. I love the little emojis that Zoom has now. Yes, Jim, thank you. Yeah, a great tool. If you, and I've done this when I've been short on time, is just a food processor. It helps speed up the process of chopping all of, depending on if you want more of like a chunky salsa or, you know, more chopped up. A food processor is a great way to chop up salsa, especially.
Hi, Megan. This is Carla.
Hi.
Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. You probably
Okay.
but how do you get a solid pack so your veggies and pickles don't float to the top?
Yes, so I would recommend, so I touched on, do you raw pack or hot pack?
Usually hot pack.
Okay, so say we're doing carrots, and so you want to cook the carrots, and then you hot pack them, so you want to pack them tight, and then you pour your liquid on it. That will prevent them from floating. So, whereas if you do a raw pack, your food isn't cooked, so during the processing time, it shrinks, and then that causes them to float a little bit more. But just making sure that you're packing them in there tight, and that will help prevent them from floating.
Okay, so like pickle recipes, I guess that would be a cold pack then.
Oh, cold pack, yeah, because they're not. Oh, let's see here. I use the wide mouth jars for my pickles because I find them easier to, I feel like I can get my hand in there a little bit better when I'm packing them. I'm trying to think, yeah, you just gotta try to get them in there as best as you can in different sizes if you have to.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. All of these series talking about canning is getting me really, my tomato plants are getting huge already. So it's getting me excited to get in and can and have a cupboard full of canned goods for the winter again.
Any other questions for Megan? No, we got them all answered.
Got them all.
Yeah, good job, Megan.
Yeah, and of course, if anything comes up, you know, we've had people call us when they're in the middle of pressure canning and they can't get, you know, their vent to steam or their water bath canning and something's going wrong. You know, we'll provide our contact information at the end, but give us a call or shoot us an email. That's what we're here for, to help you through the process and help you become more confident in your skills.
Absolutely. And I also noticed that we had a few people join us throughout the session and towards the end as well. And so since you have joined the session, you will get a link emailed out to you once this video is processed, because it has been recorded. So you can go back and watch it on the SDSU Extension YouTube page and see everything that Megan covered and anything you might have missed too, along with that. Okay, since we are done with questions, we're gonna put up those polling questions again just to see how much confidence we have gained throughout this session. So I'll relaunch our first poll. here, which of course is just your confidence on the knowledge of now water bath canning. Coming in here, looking pretty confident. Give you guys a little bit more time to get those answers in. We're almost there. Okay, I'm gonna stop it. And it looks like our confidence definitely grew throughout the session, which is what we're looking for here. I'll share those results there. So most of us are feeling almost very confident or at least confident. So that's good to see. Here's our second poll. Your ability to follow safe practices for water bath canning. Give you a few more seconds here to get that response in. All right. And again, we have seen some increase in confidence levels, which is great here. Most people are confident. So we'll see a lot more people water bath canning this season. And finally, knowing where to go for safe, research-tested recipes. Give you a little bit more time here to get those answers in. All right. Let's see here. And we have pretty much everyone saying that they're at least confident or very confident. Thank you so much, guys, for answering those questions. And that concludes our program for today. You can see that the next session we have will be on July 14th, and it'll be over fermenting. And we have a guest speaker that day, Brianna. And then we'll move on with the rest of our sessions through, of course, September. And if you have any questions at all, like Megan said before, feel free to definitely contact Megan or Hope Kleine. We'll have their information in the chat box in just a second here, but you can see Megan's on the screen currently. And with that, that'll end our program. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you at our next session covering fermentation. So have a great day.